Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another Saturday night with the Football Diehards. This is the DFS show on youtube.com/football diehards for week 2. I am their host, Jamie Calandro at JAC3600, joined as always by my fabulous co-host, Eric Romoff at Fantasy NAV. We're going to be breaking down the entire week 2 12-game main slate, notably focused on DraftKings, but we'll try and throw in a couple. I know we got a lot of FanDuel players out here as well, so we'll try and, if there's any FanDuel specific plays, hit them as they come along, or, fades, stacks, whatever we got. And, post your questions in the chat. I think we got to them all last week, so we'll do our best to get to them again this week. But before we get to it again, Eric, how you doing, and how was your week 1?
I'm doing was those fun outings where all of my low percentage hits managed to hit, but they all hit in lineups that were by Eli Mitchell or T. Higgins or Dak Prescott. So definitely good to have confirmation on the line of thought, but would rather have them in a couple of different builds to make.
I don't know if we may have lost Eric there, but Eric, are you still with me there?
Oh no.
Uh-oh. Well,
yeah.
Hopefully we'll get him back there. So week one was definitely a good one on my end. I kind of had the same thing going on as Eric did there with I dodged a lot of the bullets with some guys that I really liked, and avoided some major injuries. It was touch and go for a while when the late game started, because a lot of my late games players were really slow to get going. But eventually, a couple of key touchdowns at the end, notably by Marquise Brown, pushed me into the green. So I was able to cash in every one of my double ups and 50-50s, and 83% of the head-to-heads. Not much happening in GPPs, but I made sure that it was there to get us into the money line, and we had profit for week 1. So what we're gonna do is, again, bring your questions into the chat. We like to interact with our listeners as much as we possibly can. And I see one from Jack Shapiro right off the bat in the chat. Jack, by the way, is my. When we get Eric back here, we'll have him talk about Pros with Joes, but the amazing charity event that he runs. And Jack is my co-manager this year. We're 0-1 right now because we've had some injury issues going on, and we missed the wide receiver run. But I'm confident with it. We're going to be there at the end here. So his first question off the board there is Paris Campbell a free square, a must play this week in both cash and GPPs? And I figure that we're going to get into, once we get Eric back, we're going to get into the Colts, because Michael Pittman has been ruled out for this one, which opens up a lot of potential value and also potential top plays with Jonathan Taylor. But I'll answer this one first, and I feel like I see Eric moving around here, so I think we got him back here. Eric, you back with us?
I believe I'm back. I'm not sure if I ever left, but maybe that wasn't the experience on the other side.
No, there was, you disappeared for us for a while there, but all right, we're glad you're back. So we'll get into the week in a second, but we're taking a question right now from Jack Shapiro. Is Paris Campbell a free square, must play this week in both cash and GPP? I'm a little bit, we'll get into the Colts big time when we get there, but I'm a little bit wary. I mean, I guess you can call him that free square. That's not a term that I tend to like to toss around as much as people like to throw it around. A free square basically indicates that you can just lock him in and he doesn't need to do much at all. But I feel like in that price range there are still a couple of better ones there. It's a weird one for me. I absolutely will say that he is both cash playable and GPP playable. I wouldn't call him like a lock that some people call the 3,000 or just above players. Where are you sitting on Paris Campbell? And we'll get into the full Colts breakdown when we get to the game. But where do you sit on Paris Campbell right now?
Yeah, I think for me, I tend to agree. I don't really think of like the kind of free. I don't really like the free square concept in cash games. He's probably about as close as you can get, right? Sitting at $3,700, he's going to be very chalky. So if he busts, you're in good company. It doesn't blow out your lineup. But if you can take that savings and use it to get unique elsewhere in your build, then I think he's a fair play. In GPPs, I'm probably going to fade him a bit. I expect him to be equally as popular in GPP as we try to find salary relief in week number 2. And without having kind of the entire field behind you, the risk that he presents is a little bit greater. So trying to fade in the larger field formats.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I mean, again, we'll get into that entire game because I have some interest in it on both ends. Right now, that the two guys, like you said, he's so cheap that he can't really hurt you that much. The two guys I'm looking at in that game, maybe jumping the gun here, but are Jonathan Taylor for obvious reasons, and then Nyheim Hines, who had 6 catches last week as well, who has to be better featured in that game. Anything you want to throw in there? I think we'll come back to this game, but anything on those two that stands out to you?
Yeah, I like them both. Right, we saw Jonathan Taylor's price tag step up considerably here heading into the second week, and rightfully so. Right, he's just so heavily involved, and that looks to be even more likely the case now that the Colts are down so many guys in the receiving core. I definitely like the Nyheim Hines call, but I do expect him to see a good amount of ownership increase as well. So all certainly on the radar in terms of cash plays. In terms of GPPs, I think they can definitely be rostered, but you need to find ways to construct the rest of your Colts and Jags exposures in a unique fashion if you want to take some of those kind of higher exposed guys.
I would tend to agree with that too. The Colts is a tough one, honestly, this week. But we'll get fully into that game as we go along here. But we're going to kind of start from the top up. And again, if you have any, thank you for that question, Jack. If you have any more questions, please feel free to post them into the chat. We see a season long one in there. That's fine. We'll get to that in 1 second, Ron. But we're going to kind of go and break down every game on the main slate. I don't think we have. Last week we spent a lot of time on there was three games that crossed the 50-point over under threshold, and there was multiple ways to stack that. We don't quite have that this week. There's only one game right now that's touching that 50-point over under, which is the Raiders Cardinals, which we'll start with. Originally Dallas and Cincinnati was sitting in that, but we lost that once we lost Dak Prescott, and it's plummeted, and it's now actually got the third lowest total on the slate. So we're going to see, I would guess, a good amount of ownership condensed into that Raiders Cardinals game. So I think what we're going to do is, we'll get into that one, and then assuming it's as chalky as we think it is, maybe explore some of the undercards, some of the other games that may not get as much exposure to, and see if we can kind of get some leverage on that play. But starting with that Raiders Cardinals game, we have the Cardinals are very, very thin at the wide receiver position again. Obviously, DeAndre Hopkins is still out. He's suspended for the first 6 weeks, and Rondale Moore is going to miss this game again. Zach Ertz, I would think, is 1 week healthier. He only had 4 targets in week 1. And the Cardinals were led by Greg Dortch, who I had to Google after that game. I'll be very honest. He had 9 targets. He had the most routes run. He had the most catches, and he had the most receiving yards. So starting with the Cardinals, who are underdogs in this game in Las Vegas, are you interested in how are you playing the Cardinals side of things?
Yeah, it's kind of tricky. To your point about Greg Dortch, you are in good company in terms of needing to Google him. He's actually the number 1 search player on Player Profiler, so a lot of people are out there trying to figure out who this guy is. For me, I like this game. It's going to be very, very popular. So I always kind of head into this circumstance with much more of a differentiated mindset, or at least attempting to take that approach to the builds. For me, if you look up at the very top of the quarterback list, there you see Kyler Murray. He's the most expensive quarterback on the board. He's $7,500. And there are a dearth of kind of mid to low price guys that are very, very popular, including Derek Carr in this game. From a cash game standpoint, Derek Carr should be close to a lock button, if not your highest exposed quarterback. Shout out FanDuel, even better price tag over on FanDuel. So I expect a lot of the ownership to go towards Derek Carr in this game of the two. So like getting to Kyler Murray, this matchup is still plenty favorable. These outside corners can be taken advantage of, specifically when you talk about Hollywood Brown, right? He's going to see a lot of Rock Ya-Sin this week. Last week, Rock Ya-Sin got absolutely torched. I think he gave up 4 catches for 60 yards in his coverage. So Hollywood should be able to get more involved. I think going with kind of the 2 pay-up options on the Cardinals side stacked together, and then maybe looking for even a second stacking piece, whether it is our friend Dortch, it is Zach Ertz, if we want to get wild and throw an AJ Green dart. The builds where I will be on this game, I'm probably going to overload on the Arizona side because I think the price tag is going to drive people away from most of those players.
Yeah, I'm with you too. And as far as Dortch goes, I'm going back to that question we had about Paris Campbell. If I'm picking between the two, I'm picking Dortch over Paris Campbell as my cheap cash game wide receiver, just because we know that, both wide receiving cores are thin, but we know that Kyler showed a connection to him. He was a safety blanket under fire there. That happens again. I don't see any reason he's not going to go back to him in that sense too. You can absolutely use both as cheap receivers if you want to play that way, and absolutely load up on running back or on a top wide receiver, one that's in this game on the other side that I'm sure we're gonna get into. But I would tend to agree with you there on how to stack the Cardinals. I think the Raiders are going to be more popular. I think stacking the Cardinals in a GPP side is the way to go. So what about the Raiders side there? Davonte Adams had 17 targets in week 1. And, there was some naysayers saying that when he left Green Bay, he wasn't going to be as effective because he didn't have Aaron Rodgers throwing him the ball. I think that put to rest any doubts of that. These guys have chemistry all the way back to college. Is he someone that he's 8,600 on DraftKings? Is he someone that you're willing to go all the way up to in cash? And I mean, obviously he'd be a centerpiece of a GPP stack. So how are you using Davonte Adams this week? And I agree with you, by the way, on everything you said about Derek Carr. He's the most owned quarterback, or most rostered quarterback, on both sites, and rightfully so. Are you pairing him if you're playing him with Davonte Adams, or is that too pricey for 1 week?
No, I don't think it's cost prohibitive, right? Like, especially with Derek Carr being in that kind of low 6K range, you can certainly get up to a stack with Davonte Adams. I think for me, the thing is kind of circumstantial in nature, right? I'm not a big fan of stacking in cash games. And so Derek Carr is likely to be my cash game quarterback. Spoiler alert. So in that circumstance, I'll probably not have very much Davonte Adams. Apart from the builds where I'm starting with Carr, Davonte Adams is absolutely on that radar, right? He's in this kind of interesting middle class. I do expect him to be popular because not a lot of people are going to feel great going up to essentially 10K to get to Cooper Kupp. So I do expect them to kind of, take the $1,300 savings and go down to a very active Davonte Adams. And Adams is in a fantastic spot, right? He's the perimeter cornerback specifically for the Cardinals are a matchup that we're going to target all year. And then, at least based on 1 week, looks like their slot coverage isn't nearly as much of a strength as it was last year, which was kind of a stretch to say that. So basically, wherever Davonte Adams wants to line up, which is basically all over the field, he should have a favorable matchup. He should see a lot of Marco Wilson, which he can absolutely torch. Really, the 2 things for the Raiders, for me, I'm probably going to fade Darren Waller a little bit. I love his price tag, but the same logic that I laid out here last week for Isaiah Simmons facing off against Travis Kelsey, still applies to Darren Waller. It's a very tough matchup. The Raider that I like the most, oddly enough, especially in those overload Cardinal sacks, is Josh Jacobs. They're going to run this guy into the ground. He is incredibly reasonably priced. Nobody likes to press the button on Josh Jacobs' name. So specifically in these larger field tournaments, a 3-by-1 build overloading on the Cardinals and running it back with Jacobs, I think is going to be a really unique angle to take on this game.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I'm looking down. I'm looking down at the running back rostership percentages that we have here, and I'm really not finding him. Oh, there he is.
Down there.
Oh, okay. No. Yep. Yep. So that's 5,800 for him is a good price tag. And I agree with you on Darren Waller. And that's one of those things too. That's like process over results too. He. Travis Kelsey, I think that's who that was, right? Yeah, last week when we were kind of talking about that tight end matchup against Arizona, we were talking about Travis Kelsey, and I don't have his numbers in front of me last week. I can look them up real quick. But, I mean, he had a pretty good game against him, but I think that's a different situation too. I mean, he's clearly the number one on that team. Mahomes likes to spread the ball around, but he is still the number one receiver in essence on that team. Darren Waller is definitely not on this team. So he has to be a lot more efficient with his catches than Travis Kelsey necessarily would have had to be, especially when Davonte Adams is going to sport. I don't think it's going to be sustainable this season, but if he's going to sport almost a 50% target share, which is what he got in week 1. And why wouldn't they continue to feed him the ball? They went out and traded for him for this reason. So I'm with you there. We didn't touch on Hunter Renfrow. You mentioned slot coverage. So we got a couple of questions in the chat we'll get to in a second. But you didn't mention Hunter Renfrow at all. With slot coverage, are you into him? He had a very pedestrian game in week 1.
Yeah, I do like getting some Renfrow in the mix, right? Given that he's got that pedestrian outing, as you put it, on his resume for the short season. I mean, as much as we talk about DFS players liking to chase, it works the other way too. Someone has a down week and their rostership is gonna decrease for the following week. So another way to get into this game. And Byron Murphy was at least passable slot corner for most of last year. Didn't look to be the case in week number 1. So happy to get some Hunter Renfrow. And because I was the one that stuck my neck out and said to fade Travis Kelsey last week, I will read off his stat line, which was 8 for 121 and a touchdown. He immediately came out and scored to rub my face in it. But process over results, I do think that is still a very tough matchup for tight ends. And while Darren Waller is very good, very, very short list, if no list at all, of tight ends that are at the level of Travis Kelsey in the NFL.
So I'm going to put you on the spot before we end the Raiders-Cardinals discussion here. They're pretty much the same price tag on DraftKings. So if you're stacking Raiders, or if you're doing a bring-back play that isn't Davonte Adams, or a second one that's alongside Davonte Adams, is it Waller or is it Renfrow?
It's Renfrow for me. Yeah, much better matchup. I think he will be rostered on fewer builds. Right, that price tag is a thing of beauty for Darren Waller. I'm jumping for joy whenever I see that in most circumstances, but specifically in the context of building out a DFS or a GPP construction that needs to be differentiated. I'll lean for the Renfrow side.
I'm with you. I agree, and I think you mentioned Waller. I think that's an appropriate price tag for Renfrow, and I think Waller's is too cheap in the context of things, as you said. And I think the field is going to see that as well and lean Waller's way. And if we factor in that matchup, I think there's a lot of avenues where Renfrow can beat Waller's score outright here. So I think we're in lockstep on this one. So let's take. It's always nice. Let's take a little break because we had a couple of questions in the chat here. These look to be season long, but that's okay. The same process applies. So Ron Dreyer, thank you for the question. Just lost Pittman. Hopefully that's just this week, Ron. Flex options, half point PPR, 1 to choose from: Robert Woods, Kenneth Gainwell, Irv Smith, Rex Burkhead, DJ Chark, or Donovan Peoples-Jones. That's quite a list you got going on there, Ron. I'll do this one first. I'll let you lead the next one. I'm gonna go with
Okay.
Peoples-Jones and his 11 targets last week. So Jacoby Brissett went through for 4.3 yards per attempt, which does not make you want to play any Cleveland Browns. But 11 targets, and in essence, he's the wide receiver. I mean, he's the wide receiver one in week one there. I assume Amari Cooper is going to be that going forward, particularly when Deshaun Watson eventually comes back. But that's if he's getting 11 targets, if that floor exists for him, he'd be the guy I'd replace Pittman with there. What about you, Eric?
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking along the same lines. For me, it was actually between Peoples-Jones and Chark. I
Me
do
too.
like that game total for Detroit.
Yeah.
So trying to get some exposure to potential scoring upside there, but specifically in the context of this roster, right? Pittman was very much so, even though we're 1 week in, a bell cow for you at the wide receiver position. So if you're talking about guys that have a more representative range to get close to what Pittman gave you in week one, I do think it's Peoples-Jones with those 11 targets. It's kind of weird. He's usually more of a downfield kind of guy. So you mentioned the low A dot for Jacoby Brissett, but here we are. 2022 is a brand new year, and if we're looking at double-digit targets for DPJ, I think his likelihood of getting closer to Pittman's productivity is greater than that of Chark, who's probably going to get somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 or 6 catches.
Yeah, and I'll even throw one more kind of caveat out there because I was between those two also, Chark and Peoples-Jones. Um, with the context, we've had a Thursday night game which had some fantasy producers in it, so I would say also I don't know where you sit on this thing, but if your opponent had Mike Williams or Justin Herbert. Or is there anybody else? I'm thinking offhand. Is there anybody else in that game that really went off that you'd be in a
Those are the
big
big
hole?
ones.
Those are the big ones. Yeah. So if your opponent
Yeah.
had them, I think it might be worth in your best interest to possibly go Chark over Peoples-Jones there just for the upside. I don't think Peoples-Jones is a ceiling play in that game. I think he's more of a floor play. Conversely, if you had one of those guys and have built up a lead, I think Peoples-Jones might be the play there because he's safer. So we hope we answered that question. Thanks for the question there, Ron. We have another one. Josh Palmer got you 11 points. Opponent had no one. Yeah, Palmer was a nice little play there. Jeez,
That's fine.
you're hurting at wide receiver, my friend. Yeah, that's kind of not neither here nor there. I mean, that was a nice outing for him. I think I'd probably stick with the Peoples-Jones play, having already had Palmer, but it's close. So our other one here from Ryan G. Half-point PPR and redraft league need to start 3 wide receivers and 1 flex. I have CeeDee Lamb, Terry McLaurin, Gabriel Davis, Christian Kirk, and Devin Singletary. Who should I start in the flex spot? Wide receiver or running back? So I'll let you lead with this one. Lamb,
So half-point
McLaurin, Gabe
PPR.
Davis. Yep.
Yeah, we're needing 3 receivers and a flex. So Lamb, McLaurin, and Gabe Davis are in those receiver spots, presumably. So at that point, it's really just a conversation of Christian Kirk or Devin Singletary. We'll talk about it a little bit more as we get into the game. Not a huge fan of Christian Kirk's matchup this week, but I do think that Jacksonville will continue to pepper him with targets. And I don't really love stacking up or having more than one player that is kind of a secondary piece in their offense. So you already have Gabe Davis in as your wide receiver. So that would lead me to kind of fade away from Singletary. So I'll fire up Kirk with the 4 receiver build.
Yeah, I would agree, but I'll just say also put Davis in the flex, not just because also, he's it's
Sure.
the later game. You always put your later games in the flex, but he was added to the injury report, and a Saturday injury is never good. So you do have Singletary to to kind of wait that one out. If Davis doesn't play, you can throw Singletary right in there, and if he does, then if Davis does play, you got to smash play in him against Tennessee there. So yeah, I'm with you on that one too. I'd play the 4 receivers and sit out Singletary and just hold him as an insurance for Davis. So all right, thank you for the questions. Keep them coming. We are gonna go flying again through these games. We'll try and get them all. I hope we can. The Raiders Cardinals is kind of like the key one there, but we got a few we got a few that I think there's some real hidden upside in this that we can find some of the similar ones that possibly less of the ownership. So the one that I really like a lot here is Washington and Detroit. Carson Wentz, believe it or not, was the QB3 this past week after a lot of us spent a lot of the summer trashing him. It was, who did they play? Oh, they played Jacksonville. So that, he had a good matchup. We can look to that, but he supported 3 wide receivers there pretty well. In theory, Terry McLaurin, who's supposed to be his number one, was third in the production scale. You got to figure that one bounces back. So where are you? This game has a 49.5 over under, which is the second highest on the slate. I think if it was better teams here, we would be looking a little bit higher on this. But these are both teams that are not really meant to succeed this year, excuse me. So, but there's got to be a lot of fantasy appeal in this one. So, give me your best thoughts, Eric, on this game. How are you approaching this from a cash and maybe a GPP stacking perspective?
Yeah, there's a lot of things to like about this game. You mentioned that it's floating around 49 points. It's one of the larger climbers on the week, right? It opened at 44.5. So the public does like this one to shoot out. Generally speaking, we can use that as an indicator for where rostership will fall in the DFS game. So I do think there'll be a lot of exposure to this game. For me, I tend to err on the side of what is the most likely thing to happen. I know we saw Jahan Dotson have a fantastic 2-touchdown game, but for me, of the kind of 2 Commanders waiver category wide receivers, I'm a bit of a bigger fan of Curtis Samuel. We see that target volume. We see him haul in as many balls as he did. He only ended up with 55 yards because his ADOT was literally less than a yard. But I do think that is a very high propensity, high likelihood target that he's receiving. I like him to continue to stack up receptions and stack up easy yardage. Maybe he gets into the end zone again. And I think he's kind of the afterthought in this Commanders offense, given the big explosive week 1 for Dotson, given the history that we know with Terry McLaurin. So kind of like trying to sneak in some Curtis Samuel, and he's very reasonably priced. So very much so the player that I'll have some of my most exposure to on the Commanders side.
Yeah, I agree. This game is very easy to stack. The Carson Wentz is under 6,000. Dotson and Samuel, who you mentioned, are both under 4,500. So, and even the Detroit bringbacks, if you choose to go that way, aren't price prohibitive. So you can stack this game, get a lot of upside, and really get some studs in the other spots that you haven't filled yet. But I'm with you on Curtis Samuel. I mean, 11 targets. They ran a 3-wide set 71% of the time. So there's really not much worry to think that one of them is going to get kind of squeezed out. They seem to be going that way. And he had 4 carries as well. So, I mean, that's a big role that they threw him in. And I think that's why they paid, he had a season to forget last year, but that's why they paid him. They paid him a good amount of money to come on that team and be that dynamic playmaker there. So I'm with you on him. He's the one that I would lean to the most, but I think the other 2 are very much in play. On the Detroit side, I'm such a big fan of Amon-Ra St. Brown this week against Washington. He had 12 targets in week 1, which was a 32% target share. The Christian Kirk, we saw in week 1 running out of the slot, went 6 for 117. So I think he's 6,500, which is more expensive than he was in week 1, which is natural. But I mean, I think he could really put up some huge numbers in this game. So I like him as a bring back to a Washington stack. I like him as the lead piece of a Detroit stack, which is also viable. And he's definitely cash playable as well in that $6,500 range. Where are you on him, and anything else stand out to you on the Detroit side, or is he kind of the one?
Yeah, so I really like Amon-Ra St. Brown this week. You mentioned Christian Kirk getting busy out of the slot last week. He was facing off against Benjamin St-Juste. That is the matchup that ARSB should see the most of. St-Juste allowed a catch on 77% of his targets. Specifically, the thing that I like about St. Brown this week is that he's sitting at a considerable premium from a price standpoint relative to the other Detroit pieces, right? You've got DJ Chark, who we just talked about and who had a fine day in the office week 1. You've got guys like Josh Reynolds down if you're trying to punt and save a little bit of money. These are guys that are thousands of dollars plus savings relative to ARSB. So I expect him to go a little bit under owned. I don't expect him to be kind of a 2 or 3% kind of guy, but I do think that he won't be as popular as he should be, and that's always the type of player that I'm looking to target. The other name of note, and it's something that we'll have to watch very closely as we lead up to kickoff, is what's going on with DeAndre Swift. Obviously, missed a couple practices this week. That happens sometimes, but with them specifically elevating Jackson from the practice squad, that always gives me feels in my emotions. So a little bit worried about his availability. If he goes, I don't think they would risk him if he's hobbled or not healthy enough to start. So if he's on the field, definitely in the range as a starter. He's kind of in that second tier from a pricing standpoint. So I'll have a lot of running backs in that range. But as we sit right now on Saturday night, I'm a little bit worried about his availability tomorrow.
Yeah, those practice squads, there was a few of them that I saw popping up today that was, kind of directly affected some players that we'd be looking at. I know it's like, just tell us why. Swift is in such a good spot too. So it's kind of a disappointment. His price is 7,000, just given what he is and what he did last week is really too cheap for him. But I don't see a path to playing him. There's such similar running backs around him that aren't dealing with that health issue. So I'll ask you this too before we move on. If he is out, are you playing Jamal? Is Jamal Williams a cash lock? He's 5,400. And what kind of a GPP stance would you take on him too?
Yeah, I mean he'll certainly be well represented in my player pool in cash if DeAndre Swift is out. I actually kind of like Jamal Williams a bit more in GPP if DeAndre Swift is playing. While he is a thorn in my side as a Swift manager in many formats, I mean, they have a role for him in this offense. He's shown an ability to catch the ball out of the backfield. He's getting a lot of looks in these high leverage scoring potential sort of settings. So if Swift is cleared and is suiting up for tomorrow, I expect Williams ownership to go all the way down into the tank, and is a player that I like to try to get into this Detroit game in the kind of 3 to 4% range in terms of rostership.
Yeah, I think so too. He's not your typical vulture. It seemed like he was when Swift made those long runs and then Williams came in and punched in. But you're right. He has a role in this offense, and he always has, even when Swift is healthy and doing his thing. So yeah, I think we covered that game pretty well. Let's move it on here. So the Falcons and the Rams is interesting to me too. It's a weird one because we're looking at a 10.5 spread. Which usually is a game script that leads to the running back. So I'm going to start with that. And then I do want to talk about the passing game for both sides here. But Daryl Henderson is at 5,700 is somebody that I am aggressively playing this week. When you consider, Akers is there. He is. And he's the guy that everyone seems to want to be the RB1 there. But Henderson played 55 snaps. Akers played 12. He touched the ball 18 times to Akers 3. Since Akers came back from that injury, he's barely over 2 yards per carry. And he also was bad in pass protection too against the Bills last week. So I don't really think we're in a position where Akers is a concern for us right now. In season logs, I'm certainly not going to say that he's droppable, but right now, I think we're looking at a place where Henderson is the guy until further notice. And he wasn't the best either, but this was a tough defense they played in the Bills. And it was him they gave all the touches to. So he is someone that I cannot imagine fading in cash games. At 5,700 GPP, if the rostership or ownership comes in at a high level, that's a little bit of a different story. Um, so where are you on Henderson, and talk to me about the Rams passing game? You mentioned Cooper Kupp being in such a great spot, but also being 1,300 more than Davonte Adams. So where are you on the Rams side here?
Yeah, first and foremost, good shout to you. To say that Cam Akers is there is maybe the most accurate analysis of Cam Akers of all time. He's literally just there. And for me, I mean, it's weird to say that we're in Daryl Henderson chalk week, but his usage certainly dictates it. In cash game, he's certainly in the pool. I keep my player pools pretty tight in cash. Whereas, I try to expand things out for these larger field settings. We'll certainly have my fair share of Henderson in the cash game. In GPPs, he's probably a bit closer to a fade. I'll at least be underweight on him relative to the field, right? He is going to be very popular, and Cam Akers is there, right? So at any given point, I do expect Sean McVay and this Rams organization to kind of start to walk up Cam Akers' involvement. And if that happens to be in week 2, and I'm on board with a 30-ish, 25% rostered Daryl Henderson, that leaves me in a very bad spot. So, I'll pick and choose my spots, but far more of a cash play for me. In terms of the rest of the Rams offense, perfectly comfortable with Matt Stafford looking at a bounce back week. The outside corners for the Falcons, AJ Terrell namely, are certainly nothing to sneeze at, right? They're kind of a neutral to somewhat of a tough matchup with Stafford's price tag coming in where it is. I do think he'll be somewhat overlooked. There are just a couple of guys in that QB range that I think people are going to click the button on first. Derek Carr being one of them, right? Going up a little bit to Joe Burrow, for example. So I do think that we'll see Stafford in that kind of 7 to 9% rostership range, which makes him interesting from a GPP standpoint. And then in terms of his receiving weapons, I know people like to think that I just want to come out here and dunk on Allen Robinson, but week 2 is not the bounce back week for Allen Robinson. I mentioned the strength of this outside cornerback play for the Atlanta Falcons. The slot corner is very much so their weakness. That is the matchup that you want to exploit. And while Robinson goes there a fair amount, it was about a quarter of his snaps were out of the slot, Cooper Kupp is 50% plus, right? So the opportunity for Allen Robinson to find himself in that favorable matchup is coming at about half the rate or half the frequency of that of Cooper Kupp. So I expect another big day for Kupp. 10K is a lot to pay for him, so I don't think he'll be rostered as much as he probably should be. I'll have exposure to Kupp. I'll be sweating the entire time because I think it's going to take the majority of the game for him to pay off that price tag.
Oh my God, I'm so with you on this. I do like Allen Robinson, and I think he should be in your season long lineups. I think, unless you got a supremely better option than him out there. But yeah, you're right. I mean, they are the typical team, Atlanta, that shuts down the perimeter and gives you everything over the middle. Their defensive coordinator is wrote the book on zone coverage, and this is just Kupp's matchup here. They have a weak slot corner and a zone coverage, and it makes me like Henderson even more too, because Atlanta over the last 3 years has given up the most receptions out of the backfield to running backs. And we know Henderson can do that too. He was kind of coming in here as the quote third down back behind Akers before he just took the job. So yeah, I'm definitely with you. I can't pay for him in cash, Kupp that is. But I'll go overweight in GPP wherever I can fit him, even at under just about 10,000. On the Atlanta side, so if we're betting that the game script goes the way here and Atlanta is passing the way they do, what would you bring back a Rams stack with? We saw Drake London really succeed in week 1. and Kyle Pitts fail, even though they had the same amount of targets. So what's your take on the Atlanta bring back here?
Yeah, so you set it up perfectly. I'm never going to be rushing out to start almost any wide receiver against this Rams secondary. There's a list of about 7 guys in the league that I think you can fire up with confidence, sort of regardless of their matchup. While I think Drake London is a fantastic prospect, I don't think he's quite there yet. We can kind of pump the brakes on that, even though he did impress in Week 1. The guy that I really like on the run back from the Atlanta side is Kyle Pitts. I mean, we think about that sort of middle class of tight ends where he sits in terms of pricing is $5,400. He's right in line with Darren Waller, who we talked about earlier, who we think is going to be popular, with Dalton Schultz, who a lot of people are looking as kind of a high volume floor type of tight end play. And Kyle Pitts, yet again, is disappointed fantasy managers, right? So that has much more to do with his scoring output than his role in the offense. I think his role is actually one of the better roles in terms of tight end still to this day. So if he's going to be that involved, if people are going to be, kind of stepping away from them because they're in their feels from last week or from last season, that is absolutely the type of play that I want to jump all over in GPP formats.
Yeah, he's that classic, like he's that classic guy in that, right? Like that "what have you done for me lately" that people complain about. Yeah. But you're right, like there's nothing wrong with the role, and there never has been anything wrong with the role. It's just the production just hasn't matched it yet, but everything points to that it's going to. So I'm with you there too. They're about the same price, London and Pitts. If I'm bringing it back, it's definitely going to be with Pitts. I think London has a better chance of seeing Jalen Ramsey coverage in this game than Pitts would as well, because he's running the routes over the middle. I will quickly mention Cordarrelle Patterson in this one. I'm not rushing to play him. But Damian Williams was put on IR, and Patterson had 25 touches last week. So I think it's okay to play him in this one if you want. I would lean Pitts and London as a better bring back, just because they'll be passing more. But we have seen Patterson, have value in the passing game. A lot of value in the passing game. So that front 7 for the Rams worries me a little bit with him, though. But I mean, I guess we can't deny that he's pretty much without competition in that backfield, at least for the time being. Any quick thoughts on Patterson before we move on?
Not quite for this week. I do think that they intended to get Williams involved more. Obviously he went down early. Now he's on IR. I think that we see Tyler Algier start to ramp up to that role week over week. So good volume for Patterson here in week number 2, but start to kind of taper off in the weeks to come.
Yeah, that's what I would think too. I mean, he's 31 years old. They're not giving him 25 touches every game, but right. But I think you're right. They can ride it while they have the opportunity for it right now. And he certainly succeeded in week 1. They almost beat the Saints there, and it was pretty much because of him. So all right, let's move on here. We have we're going to go to Houston, Denver next. And this is an interesting one too, because the Denver is currently has the highest team total on the slate, unless it's updated since I've last looked at it. They're at 28.5, and I'm just scrolling down right now. Oh no, the Rams are at 29. All right, the second highest team total on the slate, 28.5. Again, big favorites over the Texans. They are at home, doing their home opener with Russell Wilson at quarterback, and they are 10-point favorites over the Texans. Coming off a big-time disappointing loss to the Seahawks. That seemed to be on coaching to me. I'm kind of all over the place here as far as what we're looking at for Denver. So I'm kind of interested in your thoughts. The running backs were pretty much a 50-50, which we thought was going to happen coming in. Both of them fumbled on the goal line. But Davonte Williams had 12 targets in this one, which was 5 more than both Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy. So what's your take on Denver here? I think we have to play them in some format just because of the team total and the bad defense that Houston is. But I'm honestly not sure how to do it yet. So, is there any insight you have on this game?
Yeah, I love you dancing around the absolutely horrendous coaching from Denver in the first game.
Yeah, yeah.
Very much so the cause of why they fell to the Seahawks. For me, I think this game is going to be a bit more competitive than the 10-point spread would imply. So I do think that Denver will need to score a bit more than just about everyone is anticipating. I'm really looking to the wide receiver group here, largely to do with pricing. Jerry Jeudy comes in at $5,600. For me, he looks to be at least the initial kind of preferred target from Russell Wilson. We'll see what happens as the season goes on. But with the productivity that we saw on Monday Night Football, with that $500 price decrease, I do think he'll be a bit more popular than Courtland Sutton. Whichever way you slice it, all of these pass catching options, including those coming out of the backfield, have a fantastic circumstance that they're heading into tomorrow afternoon. The secondary of the Texans is very much so the weak spot. Not to say that they're great against the run as it is, but you look at some combination of Stingley, Nelson, and King. Stingley's probably the most talented of them, and he's playing his second game. He just got torched for 6 and 81 yards. So I expect Russell Wilson to be able to do whatever he wants through the air, and hopefully that includes another double-digit target for Davonte Williams, right? I think people will probably shy away from both of these Broncos backs a little bit, given that they both fumbled. They had what looked to be an even split in terms of the workload. But if you're going to get even a slightly under-owned Davonte Williams, and he's going to see 8-10 targets again, that feels like an absolute smash spot against a Texans defense that is still not good against the run and was certainly getting gashed out of the backfield as running backs were catching the ball last week and last season.
Oh yeah, I mean, Taylor and Hines, they picked up right where running backs left off against this Houston team last year. I'm perfectly fine. And Javonte Williams is someone that I was not on in the summer. I never understood his ADP one that didn't move once Melvin Gordon re-signed with them, and I'm still wary of him as far as people want him to be the lead back there, and it's just not the case. But I mean, that was an encouraging sign to see that 12 targets. I mean, it's he played every passing down, and he played the entire crunch time in those games. I watched that whole game, and he was in the final 2 minutes of the half. Gordon didn't see the field, and then the final 2 minutes of the game as well. So I think he's a very good play. So real quick on this side too, we have Albert O. I can't ever get his last name right, so I'm just sticking with that. He had 6 targets, and he looks like he's going to be one of the more popular cheap tight ends in this one. He's 3,700. He only had 33 yards receiving, but he had 6 targets, and he played the majority of the downs. So is he someone that you're using? He's in my placeholder for cash right now, but I'm still doing some evaluating.
Yeah, I think he makes sense in cash. For me, I'm probably not going to have much of him, because if I'm going to be down in the doldrums of the bottom of tight end pricing, there are a few guys that I like a bit more, an Evan Ingram, a Logan Thomas, for example. So I won't have a whole lot of him from a GPP perspective, but in terms of the likelihood that he'll pay off his price tag in a cash game, it's very, very high. So certainly understand why you'll be building around him, or at least have him in as a placeholder 12 hours, 16 hours or so before kickoff.
Yeah. I'm going to evaluate, still, because technically, if you want to look at it this way, he's still the fourth option in that passing game if we're to expect Javonte Williams to do what he did again. We have a couple more questions in the chat. And we're going to try and go as fast as we can to get in as many games as we can. We kind of, there was a lot of stuff that we hit on here, but real quick before we get to these questions, the Texans, are you interested in anyone there? It seems to me that Brandon Cooks is the only one that you really should be looking at. It's a tough matchup, but he did have 12 targets, and he did what he does, and that's just be the high target percentage guy, and he's only 6,000. What's your take on him, quick?
Yeah, I'm probably out on Cooks this week, right? You mentioned the tough matchup against Patrick Surtain. He did give up 7 catches to DK Metcalf, but basically 0 yards after the catch. because DK Metcalf is an extraterrestrial and could body him to catch that ball. Patrick Surtain is 4 inches taller and several pounds heavier than Brandon Cooks, so I think he's going to have a hard time this week against Surtain.
Yeah, and like you said, Metcalf got the catches, but that's about it. I mean, it was 7 catches for
Right.
36 yards. So even so, they pretty much bottled him up. So I'm kind of with you there. I do love the price tag and like pretty much banking on double-digit targets almost every week. But there's other guys in that range that I think you can look to if that's where you're looking. The Denver guys we talked about, Judy is $400 cheaper than Brandon Cooks. I think that'd be the way I would lean in a situation like this. So, all right, let's get to the questions here. We have another season-long one. We have a DFS general question here, too. I'm going to take that one first. Kevin, we'll get back to yours in 1 second. It's Jack Shapiro again. It says, I'm new to DFS, focusing on 50-50s. Is there any appreciable difference between the contests on DraftKings and FanDuel? So the two that come to mind for me right off the bat are the fact that DraftKings obviously is full PPR versus FanDuel, which is half. And DraftKings also has the bonuses, which go a long way too. The 300-point passing bonus and 300-yard, bonus for passing, 100 yards receiving, 100 yards rushing, things along those lines. Is there anything I'm missing? Just real quick, I wrote a whole article on this, but I can't think of them offhand. Is there anything I'm missing between the two there that stands out?
No, that's really it. And for me, it's much more to do with the scoring format, PPR versus half. In cash game, you're looking for predictability, and you can far more accurately forecast someone's role than you can someone's productivity. But when their role, the number of targets or receptions they're going to get, yields a 50% increase or 100% increase in their point scoring, going from half to full point, far more accurate from a projecting standpoint. So the vast majority of my cash is taking place over on DK.
Yep. Same for me. And I think that's the way to go, especially in those 50-50s and double ups and even head to heads for those that cash play. So we hope that helped. We have another one here from Kevin D. Start Jalen Waddle, CeeDee Lamb, or T. Higgins, 2 points per reception. That's an interesting scoring.
Ooh, interesting.
2 points per reception. Yeah. So why don't you take this one first? Waddle, Lamb, or Higgins?
So this is tricky. I'll probably go Jalen Waddles between Waddle and Lamb for me. I don't think that this Bengals offense is going to need to throw a whole lot to support a second wide receiver there in T. Higgins. And we'll probably talk about it as we get to the game. But this Baltimore secondary is decimated. You get some practice squad guys trying to cover Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, and they're going to be in for a very bumpy road. So I do like Waddle to be the higher volume option in that Dolphins passing game. So with the 2 points PPR and the subpar coverage that he'll be facing, I'll go Waddle here.
I agree. Funnily enough, we eliminated Lamb right away in this one with the downgrade at quarterback. But I agree with you. Waddle would be my choice there as well. So actually, we have probably about 10 minutes left here, maybe a little bit more. I want to get to as many quick hits in these remaining games as possible, but I know we had talked off the air, and that Miami-Baltimore game was one that we really, really had some opinions on. So let's kind of move to that one and get a sense of what it is we're looking at there. These are two teams that won fairly easily in week one and profile as above average defensively. So, this is a game, we got the Ravens are 3.5 point favorites over the Dolphins. It's kind of a mediocre over under at 44.5. But that's not really low as far as the games that are around it. What's your take on this game? I've been back and forth, honestly, on the Baltimore offense versus the Miami defense. And then, like you mentioned, the Baltimore secondary is obliterated. And Miami's got some receivers. So what is it you're looking at here? I'm way more on it than I was earlier in the week.
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite games to stack and run back in a GPP setting. The only kind of qualifier that I'll put there has to do with Teron Armstead. So he's questionable heading in tomorrow. If he's ruled out to go along with Austin Jackson ending up on IR, I'll probably walk back my exposure. But I am all in on Mike McDaniels and his offensive prowess, the scheme that he draws up. The weapons that they have on the Miami side of the ball offensively are world class and should be able to absolutely torch this Baltimore secondary. And then on the other side, if I'm going with a Tua Waddle Hill stack, which combined will probably be less than 1% ownership in terms of that combination, I love running it back with Mark Andrews. Very much so the safest role in this offense. Should have a plenty fine day and reasonable matchups up against the linebackers and slot corners for the Dolphins. And sitting all the way up at $6,400, I don't know how many people are going to pay up for him when they can get Waller for $1,000 less or Pitts for $1,000 less. So that 3x1 stack is one that I will have a fair amount in my large field for tomorrow.
Yeah, and that's kind of one, I like when we do this, it's good to toss these things around because that's one that I wasn't on. And you kind of broke that down and it's put me on it too. I'm definitely doing pretty much that exact stack.
Let's ride.
Because let's go. My whole thing with this game was that I'm not on Lamar Jackson at all. And, I've been kind of riding this theory for so much of this week and answering every question that I've gotten against this. I've just forgotten about that Miami side almost. And I think you make a good point in that. So real quick on the Lamar Jackson thing, it's so hard for me to fade this guy that I've been in love with all summer. He was my QB2. I ranked him QB2 ahead of Herbert and Mahomes coming into this year. I think I'm going to be wrong on that. Just because of some of the things I've kind of seen so far. Ronnie Stanley is hurt again for an indefinite amount of time. They lost their backup to a torn Achilles. So they're on their third string left tackle in this one. Miami showed a big time pass rush. Their secondary is one of the best in the NFL. And then again, I never play narratives. I'm always 100% stat based in this thing. I don't think there's any merit to it's his birthday or he's against his old team or anything like that. I do not factor any of that in when I'm picking these players. But that contract thing, that's going on with Jackson and the fact that he did not run at all in that opening game against the Jets, which was a prime matchup to run on, and the fact that they had ineffective running backs running behind him, it concerns me a little bit with this. Maybe he's not running because of that contract thing. And if he's not running, he is not as valuable as he has meant to be. His thing is that he's a running back on top of a quarterback. But if he's just a pocket passer, he's not the guy that I was ranking at number 2. So where are you? Am I over the top on this? Is it something to be concerned about? You can give it to me straight, but I'm off Jackson this week, and I have him quarterback 10 in my rankings this week too.
So I think that's a very astute observation, but I'm not quite to the point where I'd say it's cause for concern. I mean, Lamar Jackson still had 6 rushing attempts on the day. The vast majority of them came in the early part of the game. Really this offense completely took their foot off the gas into that fourth quarter and even kind of towards the end of the third quarter. So, I can see a world where that is in his head, right? He doesn't have that contract yet. He doesn't want to expose himself to additional unnecessary hits. But I think unnecessary is the key there. If his team is comfortably in the lead, I don't think he's going to run as much. So in those cases, absolutely just plummets his value, right? He is kind of a back end QB1 if he's not getting, north of 35 or 40 yards on the ground every week.
Yeah, I'm probably going to regret this one, but I have no Lamar Jackson this week. All right. Well, thank you for at least keeping me straight there. All right. So we got about 5-10 minutes left. I'm going to be joining the football diehards on Sirius XM NFL Radio with Bob and Mike shortly to talk about a lot of the same stuff. So we have some games that we didn't quite get to. So I'm just going to kind of go quick, and I figure we can just do some quick hits on any standout plays. Don't really have to give stats, but maybe just a sentence or two each on why there's someone that we're using here. So Indianapolis, Jacksonville. I said we'd get back to this one too. We talked about it already. Michael Pittman's out. We got cheap receivers: Paris Campbell, Ashton Dulin, the two running backs. Are you using we talked about Taylor and Hines, but are you using Dulin or either of the tight ends?
I am not using Doolin. Where I am going to punt at the wide receiver position, I actually like Mike Strachan, right? He's a horse of a man. He's a huge dude. We saw him get some deep targets and haul them in last week. I think he's going to largely be overlooked. So as opposed to Doolin being one of the more popular options, I'll take the same theory, but go with a little bit under a lower rostered player in Sachin.
Yeah, and I think Kylan Granson is interesting in this too. This is like a deep pull. Like if you're,
Right.
mass entering here and you got 20, 30, 40 lineups. He's 2,600 and he got 7 targets in week 1. Again, that was a full overtime game. So we can look to those target numbers to be a little bit inflated. But he profiled as the better, and one of those athletic tight ends that will catch passes eventually if he gets the role. So I don't mind that at 2,600 in GPP either. All right. So we also have the Bucks and the Saints. This is an interesting one. Brady has failed against the Saints in his time as the Bucks QB. The Saints backfield is all kind of banged up. Kamara looks like a true 50-50. Ingram is questionable as well. I do think they'll play just because they practice in a limited capacity. Where are you looking in this game? The Bucks wide receiver core is all questionable. What's your take on this game real quick?
Yeah, for the Bucks, it depends on who plays. I think that Russell Gage has a decent shot at playing, and I like him in this matchup. On the New Orleans side, big fan of Michael Thomas here. I mean, he is critically underpriced. I think he's like $5,800, and it's very much so the lead in this receiving offense. But ultimately, Tampa Bay looked a little bit wobbly, even though they were able to win comfortably. And as you mentioned, just about everybody for the Saints is playing through injury or they have secondary pieces in there. So this is the type of game where I really look to avoid in DFS.
Yeah, me too. And it feels gross to say that with, a Brady-led team and a Saints team that, is passing a lot more now with Jameis Winston. But I'm kind of in that boat too. And it's not just because I don't like the players. I just don't know. There's no read on which one to use in a situation like this. And you kind of want a little more predictability for that. All right. So, yeah, I think we're on the same page there. Cincinnati, Dallas is another one of those late games that we've got going on here. For me, I think in GPP, Jamar Chase is perfectly fine after 16 targets. My main exposure here is Mixon, who ran as a true bell cow last week, again in a full overtime game, and also pairing him in cash. We don't talk defense as much, but I mean Cincinnati is $2,200. That is the easy cash play against Dallas, who no longer has Dak Prescott. I don't think you use them in GPPs because defense is so variant. But anyone I missed in this game on the Cincinnati or Dallas side?
No, I think CeeDee Lamb and Dalton Schultz volume should be relatively safe. Just that is going to be much closer to the line of scrimmage, and their scoring opportunity is going to be limited. From a GPP standpoint, anytime that there is an ugly one like this game is dropped by nearly 9 points and it's over under. All of those players not named Joe Mixon are going to be under rostered. So if you're looking to get guys that should have pretty steady roles on the Bengals and on the Cowboys side, but won't be nearly as popular as they typically should be, interesting little leverage spot, but kind of like a last guy in sort of consideration.
Yep. Awesome. So All right. Now Seattle, San Francisco. That's an interesting one too because this is the other one. We mentioned Derek Carr as kind of the lead cash quarterback here, the most rostered on both sites. My other option on DraftKings, at least, you mentioned FanDuel, and Derek Carr seems to be the guy there. But $500 cheaper. I love Trey Lance this week as a bounce back. I mean, people are ripping on this guy after playing in a monsoon. Um, and not producing when really nobody produced in that game, just because of the weather. I think this is a supreme bounce back spot. The Seahawks lost Jamal Adams for the season, so their defense has got a big hole in the middle there now. And even in that game with the wet field, he still rushed 13 times for 54 yards. So that rushing upside is there for him. So he's the other guy that I'm between Derek Carr and Trey Lance as the DraftKings cash quarterback.
I absolutely love that call on Trey Lance. I think he's even got a place in single entry or kind of 3 or 5 max GPP because everyone is writing off that performance from week 1, but the utilization is the key. 13 carries is a ton of rushes for a quarterback. So happy to get that into my lineup. The other note that I'll put out there is Brandon Ayuk probably will play more slot than any of the other receivers. Really solid matchup against either Michael Jackson or Coleman out of the slot. So should have a favorable DB matchup lining up across from him.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you on that one too. And I've gotten some Ayuk questions today and at the end of the week, and I'm pretty good playing him in any format as well. All right, so we're getting to the end of the show here. I wish I'm sorry we didn't, completely dive into every game here, but sometimes in DFS it's kind of pays to really focus on those two. I will throw one more out. We didn't get to my Giants, who, man, that was a nice win against Tennessee. I will throw that game out. We got Giants Panthers. Saquon Barkley is projecting to be the highest rostered running back this week, 7,300. I think that's perfectly fine. But real quick, what's your take on Christian McCaffrey at 8,900? We were talking about him as being far too cheap at 8,500 last week, and he disappointed. He got a touchdown, which kind of salvaged his day, but he disappointed big time. Is this a bounce back for him?
I think it should be, right. Even 8,900 is a little bit too cheap for him. There was a weird play where I think he picked up and ran a fumble forward, and he probably should have gotten yardage for it where he didn't. And it was a good chunk of yardage. So, might have made his day look a little bit better. But ultimately, his role in the offense is largely what it was. They didn't run very many plays in Carolina last week. I think it was right around 50, if not a little bit less. So if you look at his percentage of the offense, generally in line with where it's been historically, they just didn't get a whole lot of plays off. And I do think that the Giants will be able to push the pace a bit more than the Jacoby Brissett-led Browns did last week.
Yeah, I agree there. So, all right, we are just about to the end of the show. Before we go, we got a few questions in the chat. Let's see if we can just quickly answer them, even if we can just give the one word answer, without the full analysis. So, Kevin D, Burrow or Stafford? What do you think?
I will go Stafford.
I'm saying Stafford too. There, you mentioned that the Bengals shouldn't need to pass as much, and Stafford's got a good matchup there. Ryan Smitty, Gabe Davis is now questionable for Monday. Do I start Curtis Samuel Sunday or cross my fingers Gabe plays and fall back on Treylon Burks if he does not?
I'll go with Curtis Samuel. Love that volume, and the Saturday injury is scary.
Yeah, I agree too. I'd love to have Gabe Davis in, but Treylon Burks is not a fallback for me there. That's too big a drop off to risk. I think you go Samuel as well. Randy Miller, Michael Carter, Allen Robinson, who we talked about, or Thielen at my flex. Who are they even playing? That's not even it's Green Bay. That's right. I'm going Allen Robinson there, despite what we said.
I will also go with Allen Robinson. I don't think the Jets are going to be running much, and Thielen has a disastrous matchup this week.
Yeah, that's an awful one, and I don't really care for him anyway this year. That's the Jefferson show there. All right. Anything quick to promote for you this week before we sign off until next week?
All of my work rolls up into my personal Twitter. It is at FantasyNav. And for those of you that either are already subscribers or are considering giving it a try, head over to SiriusXM Channel 87. Check out the Football Diehard show where Jamie will be scurrying to and keeping up this fantastic DFS analysis here in about 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to it. I do think I'm checking right now, but I think it's SiriusXM 88 NFL Network. I'm scrolling as I'm talking to here because
Your
it was last week.
simulcast, yes. NFL is 88.
Oh, is it both?
Right.
You'd think I'd know this by now, but that's all right. Eric, great job as usual. It was great to break down week 2. I'm sure we'll be texting each other with, tilting and whatnot. Thank you to everybody in the chat that asked the questions. Keep them coming next week. We will be back this same time, Saturday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, for week 3, in which is sure to be another fun night of DFS. So for the Football Diehards, I'm Jamie. This is Eric. We will see you next week. Thank you very much.